Good morning, Prof.
Good morning, Reverend. How are you, sir?
Fine, thank you, sir. Good to talk to you again this morning.
Yeah, nice to
And I
be here,
also
sir.
want to say good morning to everyone that is joining our live stream today. It probably is afternoon for someone from where is watching, and maybe it's evening for someone else, and maybe night for another person, depending on where you're joining the live stream from, what part of the world you're joining the live stream from. But greetings to every one of you, and thank you again for joining our live stream today. It's always a privilege for us to get the opportunity to talk to you and to share with you, to be given the chance to come into your space with these expositions, these teachings. And for some time now, we've been having economic discussions with Professor Kent Hodge of Christian Faith Ministries. Not economic discussions in a vacuum, but economic discussions that pertain to our existential experience as it pertains to here and now, our life in this space and time. And the goal here is to try as much as possible always to relate the teachings of the Bible, the life and the teachings of Jesus Christ, and the example of the early church to our current life situations and our experience in the world today. There is always a way. Jesus is the truth, and he is the true light that shines in darkness, and darkness cannot comprehend. And the way forward for the world today, especially with all this darkness the world is contending with, is to embrace the true light, the life and the teachings of Jesus. And these are the things that we explore with Prof on our, on our podcasts that we have, like 2, 3 times every week on this channel. We want to continue on these economic discussions today. And today we want to compare biblical economics versus Malthusian economics. Biblical economics versus Malthusian economics. We want to see the economics of the cross as demonstrated in the early church in Acts of the Apostles and beyond, and compare it with the economics of Thomas Malthus, the blueprint on which most of our global economic policies and principles is built on today, and to see the pros and the cons. We believe that adopting the example of the cross and the early church would help us carve out a better society and drive towards a world where people are better treated, and are better accommodated than what we have today. I'm going to allow Prof do much of the talking today. I'll ask very important questions where it becomes necessary to ask those questions. Prof, I would want you to give us an overview first. I'm going to be coming in intermittently, but to get us started, I want you to give us an overview. I know I just spoke about Malthusian economics. That might be a bit confusing for a few people who are hearing. So I would want you to just kind of like break that down. What is the general overview of the Malthusian economics? Let's get started from there, sir.
Okay, so Malthusianism is a term that most people would not be familiar with. Um, those who propagate Malthusian principles today often don't tell you that they're doing so. It's all very covert or covered over. Um, but going back to, I think it was the 18th century, Thomas Malthus, I think it was his name. So if you look up Malthusian or Malthus, you can find this easily on the internet on Wikipedia, and you can at least be introduced to it there. Wikipedia will not give you a proper analysis of it, but it will introduce you to the person and Thomas Malthus. But he was part of the British Empire, the British East India Company, back in those days, and he put forth an idea, what we call today the closed system economics, and which is a very negative or apocalyptic worldview. Now, when I say apocalyptic, I think most Christians have an understanding of what that means, like in end times. It's not the right use of the word apocalyptic. It doesn't really mean this, but in popular understanding, apocalyptic means destructive, everything falling apart, chaos, uh, warfare, and it's a very much a premillennial view of the scripture that everything is going to get worse before Jesus comes. There's going to be wars and destruction and floods and earthquakes and basically an apocalypse in terms of the popular meaning of the word,
Yeah.
meaning destruction. And you get a lot of these ideas on Hollywood today. Almost every movie you put on, I just don't watch them anymore. Hollywood has become completely depraved.
Mm.
You get apocalyptic morals, all sorts of immorality. Um, you get apocalyptic violence always on these movies. You can't hardly watch a movie where people aren't killing people.
Yeah.
Um, you get warfare. You get alien invasions. So the
You get a
idea
lot
that
of
aliens are
LGBTQI
coming,
agenda.
there's going to be some sort of an attack from aliens. And even in Christian schools, I saw this was being studied in Christian schools as some sort of curriculum. Looking for aliens that was supposed to be science. Well, that's not science. It's a lie. The whole thing. And so Christians need to wake up and have a look at our curriculums. And we don't want two Bibles. The scriptures on one hand and false science on the other hand.
Mm.
Um, Science is good, but it's got to be true, demonstrable, observable science through testing, not these unsubstantiated theories that go by hearsay and rumors, imaginations and models of man. Uh, but then you get apocalyptic movies about a meteorite about to hit the Earth, or about a virus that's going to wipe out humanity.
Mm.
Most of the movies put out by Hollywood are either apocalyptic in morals or in crime or in some sort of devastation. Very very negative worldview, and this is brainwashing people to accept this negativity. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Governments love negativity because it means that they can restrict humanity more.
Mm.
If there's a impending apocalypse, then we need to be our freedoms need to be restricted. There need to be government measures to try to alleviate these disasters, and so that reduces human freedom. Maybe more taxes. One of the apocalyptic scenarios is climate emergency, that we're all going to be destroyed. We shouldn't be here now because they said by 2025 the Earth would have been destroyed already. I think it was back year 2000. The Earth should have been destroyed by climate change. None of their predictions have happened, and yet there's no accountability for their false predictions. They're just allowed to continue and make more false predictions. But climate change apocalyptic scenarios have led to more taxes, more impoverishment, cutting back on economic activity, deindustrialization, attacks on agriculture. They're saying we can't have cows now because they fart and they pollute the environment, so we're not allowed to eat meat. So, there's a tax on farming today. It's very expensive in Nigeria to farm chickens. A lot of egg industries have closed down here because they can't get feed. Pig industries, all sorts of animal farming has become too difficult to operate now in Nigeria. And this is all deliberate strategy. None of this is just happened. It just happens to be the economic situation. It's by design, and it's justified by things like climate change scenarios and so on. And so these things they're portrayed as reasonable. Malthusian teaching. I said back in the 18th century. Thomas Malthus said that we're having an explosion in population. The world cannot contain this population. It's going to cause food shortages, and that's another apocalyptic scenario. They still propose today that food shortages, these things have never happened except through wars and the acts of humanity that have created food shortages. But our agriculture is well able to keep up with feeding our populations quite easily without any problem. These things are lies, but they come across as reasonable, sensible. So Thomas Malthus was saying that, we've got to be very careful about our populations. We're all going to starve. There's going to be great, terrible consequences. So we have to cut back on populations. And so Malthusianism, which is Thomas Malthus' sort of
Yeah.
philosophy, Malthusianism basically is an apocalyptic philosophy, a negative worldview. It's the idea of entropy in science. If you want to give it a scientific description, entropy in science is, I think, the second law of thermodynamics, postulated by, I think it was Isaac Newton. And it says that all systems tend towards decay. All systems break down and decay given enough time. So all systems, that is physical systems, systems in the universe, gravity or whatever the system is, all systems will break down and decay and move towards chaos. Entropy means disorder over
Yeah.
time, unless an intelligent force acts upon that system to correct it. I used to tell my children that their bedrooms were proof positive of entropy, that you open the door to their bedroom and you could see that all systems had broken down and tended towards chaos, that, the bedroom was a mess, unless an intelligent force was acting upon it, and we're still looking for that intelligent force.
I thought
I was really,
I thought you were the intelligent
I'm just
force.
joking, playing with my children. But in other words, I was asking them to clean their bedroom. But this is the worldview today of Malthusianism, and it presents itself as very reasonable. We care, we have empathy, we want to save the planet and so on. But basically, it's telling us we should not populate, we should depopulate. We should not industrialize, we should deindustrialize. Because we are creating this disorder, this environmental catastrophe, and COVID-19 that initially was blamed on industrialization. It was saying that, look, we are mankind is protruding too much into natural habitats where animals are, and with our farming and so on, and so we're getting too close to wild nature. And therefore, the viruses within natural habitats are crossing over into humanity and causing apocalyptic disease and destruction. Millions are going to die. They were saying when COVID-19 started that we're going to walk down the streets of Jos and see hundreds
Yeah.
of thousands of bodies on the side of.
Mm.
Why? Because we are. That's what they were saying. It was a total lie. And but we found out later that COVID-19 wasn't the result of our farming,
Yeah.
but it was a result of a deliberate production of a virus in a laboratory. Whether it was in the Wuhan lab in China or whether it was in laboratories in Ukraine. Not all of these laboratories have become known yet to the public. But many viral laboratories in Ukraine have been started up by NATO and the CIA. Not only were they inventing new viruses, constructing new viruses biologically, but they were doing so that would especially attack Slavic populations, Russian populations. Now, what's Russia going to think about that when their next door neighbor has laboratories that are constructing viruses specially aimed to kill Russian people? I'm not sure you'd be too happy about it. So these laboratories are all over the world, wherever NATO occupies, wherever CIA occupies. And COVID-19 has brought this out into the light. They lied about this for years, saying no, it was a natural phenomenon. COVID-19 was a crossover from animals because it was our fault, not CIA's fault, our fault, because we farm too much. We have too much food. We should cut back on our farming and our food supply so we don't die of a virus. So we don't get too close to wild animals and die of a virus. And so, and we believe all of these apocalyptic scenarios because we watch them on television all the time. They enter into our consciousness. Hollywood has to be seriously changed. It has a whole lot of things like sexual morality, pedophilia, apocalyptic scenarios, all these things that bring a doomsday kind of culture into play, a judgment kind of culture into play, and which get into our minds, and we see everybody as the enemy and everything. That's what Hollywood always portrays. The enemy is attacking you, and Hollywood needs real renewal, either to be shut down, to be, it needs a serious reformation, very serious one, not just minor things. But this has been building up for decades. This kind of culture, this demonic, ungodly culture, because this apocalyptic culture is demonic. This culture of fear, this culture of end times, this culture of destruction, this culture of negativity is demonic because this is Satan's will for humanity and for the world. Like Jesus said, he comes to steal, kill, and destroy. This is Satan. This is his program. This is his vision for the world and for humanity. God's vision is very different. We see that in Genesis 1 and 2, where it's a vision of abundance. It's a vision of goodness. And so God's vision needs to be promoted in industry, entertainment industry, and things like this. We need to get away from Malthusianism, a vision of destruction. Now, Malthusius, I said Thomas Malthusius in the 18th century, his philosophy is, as I said, it's presented as noble and empathetic to save creation, but it's not. It's a very covert, deceptive philosophy to destroy creation. It was employed against India. Millions of people were killed of starvation in India, um, you know, through imperial methods, ruining their farming. And then the British Empire was involved in this, and then putting it down to natural means, just like COVID. They've done the same thing with COVID today, and saying that it's because of overpopulation these things have happened, and it's not the leaders' fault, it's not the elite's fault, it's the people. It's always the people's fault. And so they visit more restrictions on the people, lockdowns and taxes, and so the people always have to pay. So they're always blamed for these things. And then they restricted Indian, really industry. They had to deindustrialize. So this Malthusian negativity about industry and so on, population growth, it led to the industrialization of India because India was starting to grow and challenge the British Empire because the British empires believed that they should have the industries. Britain should have the manufacturing base, not India. India should be for raw materials. Africa should be for more. Africa should not industrialize. Africa is designated as the region for raw materials, and so the British Empire will maintain the industries, and the value-added economies. And first of all, they did that in Britain and in the US, and then they moved to China and developed China as an industrial center, but it was owned by the same British banks. So it's, even though industry is developing in China in the last century, it hasn't really been Chinese industry. It's just been an outreach of British industry, and so all the textile industry in India were shut down through Malthusian kinds of teachings. We have to cut back. And as again, Malthusianism is imperial strategies legitimized by sleight of hand. Talking about natural apocalyptic scenarios and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, so they did it to China as well. They've done it to Nigeria. All Nigeria's textile industries were shut down. Nigeria's industries were shut down through the structural adjustment program, saying that we had to make our economy more efficient. What just happened is that all of the assets from our industries in Nigeria were sold out to abroad, moved to China, which the British banks owned, and so Nigeria was shut down as an industrial nation, and that continues today under the auspices of climate change, which is a lie. It's just another United Nations rationale in order to deindustrialize Africa, because Africa has been designated as a resource center. And that's also why we have terrorism here, sponsored by the same people abroad, in order to create chaos, apocalyptic scenarios, Malthusian, Malthusian outcomes.
Yeah.
In Africa, whereby there's no industrial development, agricultural development, but rather resources are given up to foreign interests. And so terrorism is deliberate. It's sponsored from abroad. They say, well, it's the Muslims doing it and so on and so forth. Well, it is, but they're also being sponsored by the world banks.
Mm.
And so on. So that's what's back in the days of Napoleon, the French dictator Napoleon, in his wars against Britain, the British banks sponsored both. Well, not just British banks in those days; they're European as well.
Yeah.
Like the Rothschilds family, they had bank in London, they had banks in Europe as well, and the Rothschilds family sponsored both Napoleon and Britain in their wars. And they do the same thing today. They sponsor terrorism and they sponsor those who fight against terrorism. And they make profits on both sides, basically causing hatred and division, dividing the world into an apocalyptic scenario so they can control the assets and the resources of countries. War is what they want because war gives them the ability to control regions, to bring down economies, to deindustrialize and to control resources and trade routes through the Middle East and around the world, and to stop competition arising in these nations. So this is all deliberate strategy. This is all a bit much to chew if people haven't heard about this before, but
Yeah.
it's just common sense. It's the way empires work. They always have worked this way. They always will work this way. And the only solution is the gospel, because the gospel introduces a whole new way of living. So that's just an introduction to Malthusianism. It's a closed, as I said, it's a closed system worldview because it's closed. That they say, well, there's no hope of new resources. There's no hope of more abundance. There's no hope of more supply. We're running out of food. We're running out of climate. Whatever positive climate condition. Everything's running out of peace, running out of order in our nations, and so we all have to decline. We all have to cut back our populations. We have a closed system, limitation of resources, limitation of solutions. That's a closed system. An open system is where we are made in the image of God, and we have intelligence, we have invention, we have technologies, we have solutions. Yet, made in the image of God,
Yeah.
we're able to, as God said in Genesis 1 and 2, subdue our environment, which doesn't mean destroy it. To subdue means to overcome challenges, to bring forth inventions, to overcome necessities, and to overcome limitations. It's an open system, not a closed system economics, but an open system economics, especially in banking. So closed system economics, which is Malthusianism, says that we have all this debt, we have too much debt, and so we're all going to be destroyed by our debt. And so we have to increase interest rates, we have to increase taxes, to pay off his debt. Britain, the people of the British company are being completely impoverished now. Sorry, the British nation are being completely impoverished now by this concept of debt, which the banks are holding over the British people. It's all false. It's all a lie. And in terms of their economic theory that they propagate, that this debt is necessity, it cannot be overcome, and so the people must increase energy rates, and they must freeze in the winter because they can't afford the energy. Taxes must go up to overcome the debt. Subsidies must decline. Pensions must decline. Care for the elderly, all these sorts of government health supports must decline because of debt, and so they must have an economy that is run on austerity, or austerity is increasing poverty. And austerity, it's a closed system, Malthusian austerity economics, and the whole thing is a lie. Now, Lincoln and President Lincoln and many, well, not many, but some other American presidents refuted that kind of economics and went for an open system economics where not by using the banks, but the governments can create money, can create credit free of charge, and infuse that credit into industrialization of their nation. So that is that bringing sovereignty back to their banks, sovereignty back to their nation, sovereignty back to their credit, their governments, refusing to be dominated by global banks, and saying no, the government will create credit free. They will create money. They will just print money free of charge without the banks. At the moment, banks loan money to governments and then charge interest on it. The bank, which is entirely wrong. No nation should have that. That's how Nigeria exists, on money loaned to it by foreign banks, and then they
Yeah.
charge interest on it. That is entirely wrong. Nigeria should print its own money, and the government, not the banks, and then give that money out as credit to the industrial sector. So industries are built, infrastructure is built, resources are developed. We own here in Nigeria iron ore, petroleum, refining of oil. All our resources developed by homegrown national Nigerian industry, not by sending little boys down into mines to get tin and then China to carry it away and process it abroad. These resources should be processed in Nigeria, and we can develop an open system, financial system, economic system that can do this. All we need is the right principles to overcome the propaganda and lies of the global banks, to overcome their Malthusiast propaganda, and the apocalyptic scenarios that all the people in Nigeria get from the television. Anytime we watch television, we are fed with Malthusian apocalypse. And Nigerians have got to be rescued from that to get back into the reality of an abundance worldview. Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy. It's a closed system, austerity, poverty economy. But Christ comes to give life and give it abundantly. His is an open system, abundance economy. And economics is part of biblical teaching because we are to be holistic. It's about how back in the days of the Exodus, the Torah was about economics, about politics. It's about life as a whole. And so Christians must not run away from these things. We need to face these things and uncover the truth in these things and begin to preach them for a better future for our children. Thank you, sir.
Amen. All right. Thank you very much for sharing. In the line of these discussions around Malthusian economics and the influence it's having in the world today, I want to bring up the subject of war, conflicts around us today. In the Bible, especially in the book of Matthew, in the concluding chapters of Matthew, I think Matthew chapter 24, where Jesus sits over against the temple, Jerusalem, and sees the temple and is telling his disciples about the destruction of Jerusalem and all that. What, within a lot of Christian interpretation circles today is thought to be signs of the end time, the second coming of Jesus Christ. But hearing you've said to us over and over that many of those things were fulfilled during that particular generation, and there are people who think that it is written that, before the coming of Christ, there will be wars and rumors of war. And therefore, this, conflict and warfare happening around the world today must be something that even God Himself allows, because they are signs of the second coming of Jesus Christ. I want to ask you now, you know, as we look at Malthusian economics and the influence it has at the global stage, I want to ask you, is there a sense in which, wars as we see today, all these regional wars we have happening, littered all over the globe today, all these incident fighting, conflicts and warfare everywhere, is there a sense in which there could be, strategic economic, interests and geopolitical agendas about, surrounding or undertoning these at the backdrop of some of these wars that we have around the world today?
You're tempting me to really get controversial and into trouble here,
I'm sorry, sir.
but I'll take the bait. And so, yeah, Malthusianism has really spearheaded recent growth in apocalyptic eschatology or end times teaching. I believe it really comes from a Malthusiast worldview, and that it has penetrated into the church. So, starting with Matthew 24, about wars and rumors of wars and all the other things in that chapter, that's clearly about the first century. It's about the days of Jesus, the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. You have to do a triple backward somersault um, to get out of that obvious context of the first century in which Jesus was speaking. The disciples came to Jesus and asked about the temple, beginning in Matthew 24. Matthew 23, Jesus was talking about the destruction of that generation and judgment upon Jerusalem at that time. And Matthew 24, the disciples said, "Oh, look at this beautiful temple." And Jesus said, "Well, it's going to be destroyed and not one brick will be standing upon another." And the disciples said, "Well, when's this going to happen?" That was their question. And they put it in terms of what was eschatological language of those days. What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of some translations say the end of the world. The actual Greek word is the end of the age.
Yeah.
That is the temple age, the Mosaic age, the Old Testament age. Not talking about the end of the world as people say today. And then you get what will be the sign of your coming, and that Greek word is parousia, which means the judgment of God. And any time that word is used in the Old Testament, like for example, is it Psalms 18 or Psalm 19? I think it's Psalm 19. You should go and check it out. The listener should go and check that out. But David speaks about the coming of God to judge his enemies, that God is coming in the clouds, that his lightning is going forth, flashing from the east to the west, and his thunders and he's striking. And that's exactly the language that Matthew 24 uses, that Christ is coming on the cloud, flashes of lightning. It's apocalyptic language. It's not literal. And when we see that language in the Old Testament, many times when God is judging a nation, he uses this language about the storms coming on the clouds, the lightnings, as symbolic language for an imminent judgment. And it's all through the Old Testament. And we never question that as literal, that God is literally going to be seen on the clouds. We know it's symbolic. But when we get to Matthew 24, suddenly we change our interpretation methods and
Yeah.
we literalize it. I don't know who told us to do that. We should, because it's really the same Hebrew apostles it's still Hebrew narrative, just like Hebrew people. And but anyway, this is a whole big subject we teach. You got to go into Revelation chapter 1. Behold, he comes on the clouds, every eye will see him. And what does he mean by that? Even those that pierced him. is talking about that particular generation. And the words in the Greek there are very clear about the people that Revelation chapter 1 is addressing. But again, this will sound strange to some people, haven't heard this before, but I was introduced to these ideas some 20 years ago or more, and I've been studying them ever since, and they make a lot of sense to me. So
Mm.
basically, in a nutshell, what we're saying is that this apocalyptic worldview that we see in the New Testament was mainly addressing that generation, the destruction coming in that generation against Jerusalem, and that is the eschatology that it was addressing. It's not addressing the end of the world and the final, ultimate coming, second coming of Christ. Christ will come again in the resurrection at the end of this world. We don't know when that will be. There aren't any particular signs in the New Testament about that. Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians 15. It just says Christ comes at the end in the resurrection of our body. So the Bible does not license us to believe in wars as some kind of tool that God is using to usher in His Son. Now, many people believe this. There's a case for radical Zionists in Judaism believe that there's going to be a lot of wars before the Messiah comes. It's part of their faith. Many Christians believe that too, that wars are necessary. I used to believe that wars are necessary for Jesus to come. So, you're almost barracking for wars. You're almost hoping for wars. You're constantly sharing that, prophecies fulfilled by all these wars, Gog and
Yeah.
Magog and all of these other nations, Russia and Iran and everything. And you think, oh, wonderful, these are all fulfillment of prophecy. So, you're enjoying these wars. Like I said, one man said to me in the church once after preaching, he said, have you heard that God is going to destroy every Arab person by preemptive nuclear strike before Jesus comes? And then he said, hallelujah, and took a sip on his coffee. No, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said, hello, is anyone home inside your head? Do you know what you're saying? But he didn't know what he was saying. He's just been
Mm.
brainwashed by an apocalypse, by a Malthusianism sort of theology, with no empathy at all. Like what
Mm.
Jesus said, you don't know what spirit you're of. You just don't know.
Yeah.
That isn't what Christ came to teach. So what I want to say here is that you go back to the Crusades 1,000 years ago, where certain people, particularly these people in Venice in Italy, I was maybe sharing on another video how that when Rome fell, when the Roman Empire fell and was occupied by the church, many of the elite families, the pagan elite families from Rome, fled to Venice, and these families come down through all the pagan empires, Greece, Babylon, and the others,
Mm.
and
Mm.
the Roman Empire, and then they fled to Venice and they set up shop in Venice and began to prosper and began to dominate trade in the region, and began to become powerful. And then about 1,000 years ago, they began to promote doctrines of crusade in Europe. This is the end. This through an eschatology. This is the end times.
Mm.
1,000 years, the end of 1 millennium after Jesus came before, and so this is millennialism, and we need to attack and retake Jerusalem so Jesus can come. And they sponsored many European nations, Britain and French, and to raise armies, Christian armies, and to go to war against Muslims in the Middle East and retake Jerusalem. It was all put forward in a sort of religious narrative, and but it was mainly so the people of Venice could increase their control of these regions, particularly trade across the Mediterranean, and their wealth, and they really prospered from it. So it was a false narrative. And eventually, it became apparent that this was false. This wasn't true eschatology. There was no millennium, end of 1,000 years. In that sense, there is a true one that we don't have time to go into today. But the way Europe has interpreted it, no. And so there was one group that came from Europe, an army, and asked the landlords of Venice to sponsor their crusade to Jerusalem. And the elite families of Venice said, well, no, you have to go to Constantinople first, which is today called Istanbul, that city. And at that time, it was led by Christians. It was a Christian city. And the people of Venice, these pagans, as I said,
It
that came
appears to
down
have
from
lost
Rome
you
to tend
briefly, though.
that problem. So I was cut out a bit. So they sent this Christian army, Crusader
Okay.
army, to Constantinople. They destroyed. Are you getting me? Sponsoring wars throughout the region, the Mediterranean region, and the Middle East, using closed system apocalyptic eschatology as Malthusian kind of eschatology as their rationale, and deceiving believers. And so, I think that's really what's happening today with Zionism.
Yeah.
That you get the idea that of Christians attacking Jerusalem has become out of flavor since the Crusades. I thought, well, obviously they won't be able to do that again. And so in the 1700s, radical Judaism began to grow in Eastern Europe, in places like Ukraine and Poland and Eastern Germany, and it's Prussia in those days, and not Russia, Prussia, and became the hotbed of a war culture. The Prussian people were very warlike and homosexual and all immoral. They were pagan, sacrifice of children, these kinds of things. We get our Hansel and Gretel, these kinds of nursery rhymes from those Prussians of that day, which were about child sacrifice, and so they promoted isms. The World Banks came from there. The Rothschilds came from those regions, and the Rothschilds were basically employed by the elite powers of Prussia and of Poland and of Hungary, which came from Venice. These were the families from Venice that went into Northern Europe and began to occupy royal families in those nations like Holland and eventually into Britain, and control these regions and even the banks, and built the Dutch East India Company, the British East India Company. And so the banks controlled by Rothschilds is really a servant of these powers, these royal powers, using the Jewish. They had a program for what they were building, and so they, in this Prussian area, in this Ukraine, Polish area, back in the 1700s and 1800s, they developed, the Prussian people, not, as I said, not Russian, the Prussian people developed these kind of ideologies like communism, Nazism, radical Islam, radical Judaism, and even radical Christian eschatology. All these systems began to be developed in that region in the 17s and the 1800s as a way of dividing people and as a way of promoting their conquering of nations, just like they did when they were in Venice, conquering Constantinople and the Crusades in these regions. So they realized by this time that they couldn't conquer the Middle East through Christian crusades like they did before, but they have to develop a new strategy. So they rose up radical Judaism in that region. Because these are European Jews. These are not Mediterranean Jews. These are ones you see them today look like Europeans, and in that region, and they became radicalized, and this idea of the homeland and going back to Jerusalem became a strong feature of Zionism during that time. And then that entered into Christian theology through the Schofield Bible. The Schofield Bible, talking about dispensationalism,
Yeah.
premillennialism,
Yeah.
and Zionism.
Yeah.
Schofield was sponsored by Rothschild. These things didn't just grow up automatically; they've been sponsored,
Mm.
and these by Malthusian connections. Okay, so Rothschilds was part of the British Empire that Malthusianism was a part of, and they're the same people promoting all these isms. You get today when you get problems between radical Islam groups and other groups, radical Judaism and so on. Both these sides are sponsored by the banks. One day we're going to wake up and stop hating each other.
Amen.
And one day we're going to wake up and stop hating each other and realize we're manipulated. We are puppets on a string, and the people that are pulling these puppet strings are the ones that want to create war. Why have they done this? Why have they raised up this end times doctrine so they can create war in the Middle East? So they have a reason to be in there. Look at the last 10 years. How many countries have they gone to war against in the Middle East? Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya,
Yeah.
Lebanon. Lebanon's been entirely destroyed. These nations with millions of people. You just got to feel for these people. Also, many innocent Jews as well have been destroyed. Also, many innocent Palestinians have been destroyed. And you can put all of these to the door of radical systems that are operating, terrorist systems or whatever, and who is sponsoring those things. And that's easy to find out if you trace the money. And so, it's just like the Crusades. It's a doctrine it's an eschatological doctrine that's been raised up for the purposes of war. So that why do we want war? So we can do regime change, we can control nations, we can control resources, and we can control trade routes. We can have a trade route from Israel right through to India, through the land, not having to sail around on the ships. Trade routes for gas pipes, gas lines, and so there's a lot at stake here concerning control of the world economy. This is the people of Venice. They're still doing this, and they've been doing it, and they've been making up many Malthusian concepts in order to keep the general population under check, even in the West, so that we don't know about what's happening, and to keep us at bay, to break down the middle class, to take away our powers, of involvement, and to humiliate people in general, so they can maintain their control in these areas. This is what's going on in the world today, but there is a faction within the world that's trying to break down this global empire and build a nation of a world of sovereign nations that are not controlled by central powers, by a global government, but instead have sovereign control of their nation and can relate together with other nations on the basis of peace. And that is what's building today. And it's a war. We are in a war today between a globalistic power that basically comes from Venice and Rome, if you like. Well, you can that's the way it is, or a sovereign national state system where we're not under global control, but we're under sovereign nations that have respect for each other. That is the battle we're in today in terms of geopolitics and economics, so that we can build a sovereign economy of an open system, prosperity and abundance in terms of creating finance, creating resource development, creating industry, as opposed to being led by a global government that destroys our financial system, puts us in debt enslavement, and breaks down our industry and our agriculture and takes over our governments. That's what we've been under for a long time now. This global system that takes over our governments, and
Wow.
it's destroying hundreds of millions of people. This is what we need to be awake to, not to have a
Mm.
violent response at all, but to have
Yeah.
an informed involvement. We need to know so that we can work with God in rebuilding the right kind of community that provides jobs, that provides prosperity, that provides wholeness for people, and not subjugation.
Thank you. One of the tools employed by people who share this Malthusian sentiments in their bid to exert control over over the population is to create a mass hysteria by, fear mongering, and they do this by peddling, very subtle lies or that creates panic. I think one of those sentiments is the fact that populations, should be clamped down on through draconian policies, because as population explodes, we are going to now experience a shortage of resources, food, and the likes. But then I just, thinking, you look at a continent like Africa, and you take a country like Nigeria, to be precise, and you come to discover that we are not even using up to half of our arable lands, not up to half at all. And so
Wasn't
the
it President
potential for
Buhari said we're using what? You said 2.8%?
2.8, yes, yes, yes. He said about 2.8. And then about 3 years ago, the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development then said that over 56% of our arable lands are untapped, unused. So you see that there is a vast potential for, enhanced agricultural output in a country like Nigeria. So when people try to scare us with this news that food shortage, there's going to be food shortage, there's an agricultural doomsday coming. We've not even used up to half of our arable lands at all. you know. And before, the recent insecurity challenge we had in this country, there was a lot of food production happening in Nigeria, a lot of food production across, especially states, the north central states, the northern states, and around the country generally, a lot of food production. But one of the challenges we're having today is that it's not, if there is a tendency of a food shortage at all, it's not because our population has overwhelmed, the capacity to feed or production. It's that, insecurity that still bears, the stamp of foreign involvement. Allow me to say that, that still bears the stamp of collusion from international powers in our country now. Has made it very difficult for people to effectively, maximize agricultural output. We just talked about over half of our arable land being untapped, and even the ones that people were exploiting before, farmers are finding very difficult to go to farms now. We know these things. I was sharing with you the other time of coming back from my village and the experience there. People not being able to go to their farms. People now, places around the house that were like gardens, playgrounds for children. People are cultivating all those places now because it's difficult for fear of, what happens when you go out to farm. So people are unable to go to farms, which is what is now resulting to some kind of shortage in food production, but not necessarily because population has outgrown the capacity to feed. There's so much potential for agriculture in a country like Nigeria. There's so much potential for agriculture in many African countries and in many parts of the world, because there is still so much room We're talking about not just land mass, we're talking about water resources that can aid fishing and a lot of other economic agricultural activities that people have not been able to exploit. So all this fear mongering about, I see that they can't be true to the fact that population is going to a point where we would not be able to feed, because we've not even used up to half the resources we have available to feed these people, the population of the world, the population of Africa, the population of Nigeria. What's your take on this, sir?
Yeah, well, they're lying to us on many levels, because once a population gets to a certain level, it begins to plateau.
Hmm.
You know, they're making us panic by thinking it's going to go to 8 billion, 16 billion, 100 billion, and it will never stop growing exponentially, which isn't true. Once you know, we get to a certain level, I don't remember what that level is when we start to plateau in terms of children and things like that. And so there's no danger of overpopulating the world. Now, in terms of resources, you know, as I said, they want us to panic, like you said. They want us to fear, because when we're in fear, we're easily subjugated. You know,
Yeah.
we become paralyzed, and fear is their greatest weapon. And so anytime, like on my computer, when I open the internet, all these news reports come up, you know, in like headlines, a
Yeah.
whole row of them. And one is that a meteorite's coming tomorrow. You know, we're going to run out of food by this evening. You're going to get cancer tomorrow. There's a new cancer strain that's killing everyone. You know, everything to your mother-in-law is looking for you. You know, by the time you've looked through the headlines, you want to go back to bed and hide somewhere. And yeah, it's total strategy. Um, and they say, well, you know, the newspaper sells fear because it makes money. But
Mm.
that's true. But they also sell fear because their masters tell them to. These
Mm.
people own the media, and they tell them what to report on. So they're not going to. They're always going to be reporting on Malthusian concepts every day. That's all you're going to get from them is Malthusian concepts. That's
Mm.
their stock in trade. And so whatever the news item is, it'll be Malthusianism. And you know, and I agree with you what you said about Nigeria's agriculture, about the foreign influence on it. Agriculture is under attack all over the world today
Mm.
in order to, you know, like as a Malthusian population control method. And in England at the moment, the Labour government's attacking agriculture through taxes. And that's happening in Australia as well. So that when the owners of a farm die, they can't hand the farm on to their children
Oh.
because the taxes are so high. They have to sell the farm and go and live in a city somewhere in a ghetto, in a small little flat. Families have been losing farms in Australia for decades. I've been watching it because my wife is coming from a rural area of farms, and big corporations are buying up farms. Families are moving out. Some dear friends of ours were defarmed a few years back, could no longer afford to farm or hand it on to their children. And this is done lots of ways, by increasing the price of water for irrigation, stopping trade with other countries for your products.
Yeah.
You know, all sorts of methods they have to put families out of farming business and to decrease the population of families in rural regions. This is deliberate. All through Europe now, they're closing down farms. You've seen demonstrations in Paris, in Holland, in Germany, in Britain, so many, and other countries, so many tractors. They drive their tractors into the capital and block
Mm.
the roads. Farmers in
Mm.
demonstrations. They're saying that farms are against the climate. They're going to destroy the world with climate change. So they have to shut down the farms. South Africa, I'm convinced, is part of the same scenario. And people don't understand this when you get the agitation about white farmers and African farmers there, and you know, and some white farmers going to America and being taken in as refugees by Trump. and all the uproar about that. The press are going to put, look, white people. Trump hates black people, and they're going to put that on the television and make it. Trump knew that. He knew that the TV would take that up and make a big deal out of it. Why did he do that? Because he's attacking this global control in South Africa. It's the issue in South Africa is not white and black. That's just a local tool they're using. It's about closing down farms. They did it in Zimbabwe. It's not the locals that are doing this. It's the Malthusianism, people. They did it in India back in the British East India Company days, and they're doing it around the world today. In every country, they have different strategy. They have different tools. In our country, we have local terrorism as the tool they're using. But it's against the farms, like you said. And we get up against each other in our country, and start fighting each other. Like somebody put shared an image a couple of days ago. If you put brown ants and black ants in a jar and put a lid on it, they're friends, the brown ants and the black ants. But if you come and shake that jar and put it back down again, then the brown ants think that the black ants did it, and the black ants think that the brown ants did it, and they start killing each other. That's what they're doing to us. So we're no more intelligent than the ants. We're as stupid as the ants. Someone comes and shakes us, and we start killing each other, rather than seeing who's shaking us.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, that they don't want us to see who's shaking us. And so they're always putting through the press that it's this person's fault, or it's that group's fault, or it's the whites' fault, or it's the blacks' fault, or in whatever country it is, it's the Christians' fault, it's the Muslims' fault. And all they're doing is shaking our jar. So they're bringing down agriculture. Now, the thing that will save the climate, and I can say that Nigeria is in nowhere overpopulated, nowhere near it. We have and they put it on television. If you watch the Geographical Discovery Channel on television here, get by satellite, Discovery Channel, Nature Channel, they put on TV these advertisements where trees are being cut down or burnt in Nigeria. And you get this lady who goes across and she's touching the top of a tree trunk. The tree's being cut down and being burnt, and there's only the tree trunk. She's touching the tree trunk like it's a child and crying. Don't mind all the hundreds of millions of people dying in poverty. It's the tree. And the reason trees are being burnt down, used for firewood, is because they have made natural gas too expensive.
Yes, sir.
I listened to a video about this yesterday from one of the world's leading economists that said that America, back in Nixon and Kissinger's day in the 1970s, quadrupled the price of oil because oil was being sold in American dollars. And that would bring more American dollars into the American economy. That's why the price of oil went up in the 1970s 400%. It's all about making more American dollars for the American economy. And Saudi Arabia didn't want to do this as the main sellers of oil. They said, what about the poor people? They won't be able to afford oil, gasoline for their cars. And Kissinger said, well, don't mind the poor people. Who are they? What's that got to do with anything? These are the same Venice people. These are the same elite bankers and royal families and others that are ruling today for the same methods as they did through Prussia, not Russia, Prussia. And so they're still doing it today to the world. Natural gas prices that Nigeria, we have our own gas here, that's some of the best gas in the world, extremely cheap. But these foreign cartels, like through these global agreements, like I said with Kissinger, have increased the price of gas so much now through the International Monetary Fund, Nigerian people can't afford it. So they've got to cut down firewood. And that's what's destroying the environment. Natural gas will not destroy it. Petroleum products will not destroy it. It's the fact that they make these things unaffordable to the local person by increasing the price globally. That's what's destroying our environment. So if Nigeria prospers, takes sovereignty back over its industry and over its banks and finances and development and resources, and prospers, like if we had one nuclear power station in this country, we could pump up the artesian water underneath the north of this nation. There's, like in Niger, there's Republic of Niger north of us. The artesian water supplies under their ground are almost infinite. They replenish. You cannot deplete them. You can pump up water, fresh water from those for the rest of your life, for the rest of the nation's existence. And
Oh,
you can irrigate the whole nation and make it green. You can grow forests, you can grow farms, you can take away the Sahara Desert. Okay, so, but Malthusianism says we can't do that. Malthusianism raises the price of oil. You know what the Malthusians did back in the 1970s? They came out with the doctrine that crude oil is a fossil fuel. And it takes millions and millions of years to break down from animal life and plant life, from fossil life into fuel. It takes millions of years. Therefore, it will be depleted, and soon we will run out of fossil fuels. The oil companies made this decision in the 70s. Why? So they could get more dollars into the American economy. Now, it's a lie. It's not a fossil fuel. It comes from volcanic activity and things like that under the Earth's surface, and it's constantly replenished. It's basically infinite, and that's why oil wells are replenishing today. They found out recently that oil wells we've been tapping for many years there's now more oil there than there was before, and new oil wells are starting. So it's basically an infinite supply. We will never run out of crude oil, and it's not a fossil fuel. That's a lie to increase the price and to bring in a Malthusian doctrine to hold us all under control in fear that we're going to run out of oil. Okay, so, but then they've held fear about nuclear power stations, increasing the propaganda about their danger and about their risk. A lot of that is propaganda, and a lot of lies have been told about that through nuclear accidents and so on. There's been a lot of cover up on that. And but there's even better technology now for nuclear power stations. If Niger had one nuclear power station, that countries have been taking their what do you call it, uranium,
yeah.
for next to nothing to power nuclear power stations in Europe, while not allowing Niger to have one in their own country. If they had one nuclear power station, they could rebuild. They could remove the Sahara Desert in their nation. They could turn it into a forest. And this is very legitimate. This is not exaggeration. And Nigeria could do the same thing. So prosperity helps the environment. It's poverty that destroys the environment.
I
We
hear you
go
say.
firewood. We cannot rebuild and restore land anymore. We cannot provide water. Prosperity restores an environment. What Malthusianism says is that the environment is so degraded, we've got to remove mankind from the environment. We've talked about this in another video. Man is destroying the environment. So we have to put man inside cities and take him away from farms and from these places and produce a food crisis to save the environment. That's a completely Malthusian lie. The Malthusianism here is so obvious. It's unbelievable that people aren't waking up to this, because it's just so untrue. When you get prosperity in a nation that man develops through the image of God, inventiveness, positivity, abundance, sort of environment that God has given to mankind, when mankind begins to operate on that level and not an eschatological apocalyptic level, then we begin to produce abundance and environmental restoration and the restoration of the poor. This is about bringing justice to the poor, hundreds of millions of them. And it's all about Malthusianism. You got to destroy Malthusianism, bring back a God-fearing economy, and then you'll restore the poor and you restore our nations, and you'll stop wars, because wars are about Malthusianism. And you will stop, not entirely, but to a large extent, you'll stop wars. and you'll stop environmental degradation. These are the facts of the matter. I didn't say it's easy, but this is the right road to be traveling on.
Oh, thank you very much, sir. These discussions we talked about, we said biblical economics versus Malthusian economics. We've explored the basis, the thesis, the deception, and the dangers of the Malthusian model of economics. I want us to, now engage before we close, bring today's stream to a close, today's discussion. Let's talk about the economics of the cross. You know, so I'm going to ask you, a broad question now. Talk us through the economics of the cross, especially as demonstrated in the early church in Acts of the Apostles,
Okay, well, yeah, the
and how
cross is.
opposed it is, how
Sorry,
different
go
it
on.
is from, and how different that is from this Malthusian model we've been talking about.
Well, the cross is not an imperial model. So Malthusianism is an imperial model. It's
Mm.
like we talked about in our last stream. Pharaoh. Pharaoh was
Yeah.
he was a Malthusian, and Malthusius or Thomas Malthus got his philosophy from Pharaoh.
Mm. Interesting.
It's a pagan, ungodly philosophy. It's a demonic philosophy. And like Pharaoh, instead, when he felt threatened by the population, he tried to cut the population. So he
Yeah.
killed
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
male children. He tried to depopulate the region to
Yeah.
maintain control for him and his family. And this is what they do today. So if you have a wealthy family living inside a castle, the castle with the castle wall,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you have all the wealth inside your castle, and the people outside the castle are too poor, you don't want them to become too many.
Mm.
Otherwise, they'll break down your castle wall. So you want the people outside the castle to start fighting each other so while you're watching television inside the castle
Wow.
and enjoying your meal. So that's just the way it works.
Mm.
So Pharaoh, that's the Malthusianism is the imperial doctrine where you don't care for people, you pretend to care. You have United Nations going around and with their aid programs and so on. And no one knows what United Nations. Look what USAID, USAID and aid, they were purporting to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
empathetic and aid organization, but they're money
Mm-hmm.
laundering. They're totally
Yeah.
unaccountable in their money. There's evidence that it was going to terrorism in certain places. And there are people speaking out about that in various governments around the world and having the evidence of it.
Mm.
I speak to certain people who talk about United Nations vehicles coming into countries and you can't search them. They're under some sort of global rule, and local governments aren't allowed to search them,
Wow.
search their vehicles. So that means we have no national sovereignty anymore. We don't have our police within our own country don't have sovereignty to search certain vehicles. We're overruled by global
Mm.
interest. And some of these people that they're involved, they know what they're talking about. Talking about terrorist financing and equipping and things like that in regions where they operate, where these people I've talked to operate. And I've talked to people in different sectors that operate in terrorist regions. Some of them in the aid, in the charity area, some of them in security areas, and so on. And it's clear what's happening. So they create this chaos, pretend to be empathetic and aid agencies, but these aid agencies and even philanthropy and a lot of these things are really private businesses that are building
Mm.
wealth for other people.
Mm.
And they're very, very deceptive. Look, it's better that we have our sovereignty than we have aid. You know, if we have our sovereignty as a nation to build our economy, sovereignty over our banks and our finances, our resources, our industry,
Yeah.
we don't need aid because we have wealth. And so, look, don't take away our wealth and give us some aid. Like they say that Africa is a net supporter of other nations. The money stolen from Africa is far
Mm-hmm.
above the aid that is given to Africa.
Yeah.
So really the world is on African benefits. Africa is not on global benefits.
Interesting.
And these are the facts that economists can write down, but you know those economists won't get into newspapers, but you can find the facts. And so especially through offshore banking and so on, where this money is, you can put this money in offshore accounts, and you can be anonymous. You know, you don't have to use your name or
Yeah.
something like that. So, you know, that's Britain started offshore banking, and it's totally immoral. Imagine that. You can have accounts they call offshore. You can have money in those accounts. No one asks you where you got the money from, and no one asks you what your name is.
Mm.
You know, and instead of that, they harass small people with bank accounts in England
Yeah.
and close them
Yeah.
down. You know, this is enough is enough. You know, this is God has to help us
Yes, sir.
here. So the cross is not an imperial system. It's a system of caring for others. So Jesus didn't save himself as imperialism does, but he saved others. And so we need the same interest. This is what got me interested in these economic things, because of the suffering of the people.
Yeah.
You know, I am not political, and I am not interested in economic issues. My father was very strong in this area in Australia: economics, business, mining, high finance, talking about billions of dollars, not his own money, in the corporations he oversaw. And he tried to get me interested in this kind of economics, finance lifestyle, in you know, working in that sector of the economy. And I didn't want to. I had a heart for the gospel, had a heart for missions,
Amen.
had a heart for people. And so my wife and I went into missions. But it's that same heart that now is bringing me around to consider these economic issues, because I've looked at the suffering of hundreds of millions of people for too long, and it hurts too much. Something has to be said
Yes, sir.
about this. And that's why I'm talking about these things, not because I have an interest in high finance or economics. I don't. I don't have any high finance. My finances are quite low. So as soon as I get it, I spend it on, you know, on helping people.
Yes,
Why
sir.
should I, you know, Jesus said things like, don't put your money in bigger barns, you know. So he spoke a lot about money.
Yeah, he did.
And he said, don't hoard it for yourself. He said, take no thought for tomorrow. He said, you
Yes, sir.
cannot serve God and mammon. So he talked about loving your neighbor, and that's about money. Loving your neighbor is not saying sorry, you know,
I hear
or,
you, sir.
you know, it's helping them. It's about money. And the Good Samaritan put his hands in his pocket, and he put that man into a hotel and paid his bill, and said, if you need any more, come and tell me and I'll pay the balance. So that's, you know, it takes, you have to divest yourself to help others. And that's what the cross is. Christ divested himself to save others on the cross. And
Amen.
that's what the early church did. They sold their lands and their properties, divested themselves to save others of different racial backgrounds, different classes of people, different genders. There was a breakdown of divisions. But today there's an increase of divisions because of, you
Yeah.
know, Malthusianism,
Yeah.
the fear tactics, the panic buttons are pushed by Malthusianism all the time, which cause us to be against each other, like the ants in the jar.
Mm.
So the church in the book of Acts is opposite to the ants in the jar. We have a positive worldview. Yes, we are suffering. Yes, we are being persecuted. Yes, we are being oppressed. But we have a positive worldview that the kingdom of God is coming into this world through the church and will eventually occupy this world and bring about God's glory from one end of the creation to the other. So we
Mm.
are very positive. I do not indulge in a Malthusian fear apocalyptic worldview at all, no matter how much people try to push me into it, the media or certain Christian circles or other, Islamist circles or whatever the circles are. I will not indulge in that because I know it's not true. I
Mm.
know it's of the devil, and that God's program for creation is the only one that will
Yeah.
endure and be successful in the end. So the church in the book of Acts had a very positive worldview, one of helping, one of building up their communities, one of building
Mm.
up their societies, one of being light and salt in the world, being leaven in the lump of dough until the whole dough is leavened.
Mm.
They saw themselves as renewers of creation, restorers of life. They refused the negative Malthusian worldview, eschatological or whatever. They refused it. And they called themselves, the early church called themselves the Isaianic community,
Mm.
like Isaiah.
Yeah.
Isaiah spoke of the desert blossoming,
Mm.
the forest regrowing,
Mm.
the poor people being lifted up, the leader serving the nations, giving his life for the nations. Isaiah posited a new kingdom that was not pagan, that was not imperial, but was one of care, and was restoring the whole world, making the world filled with the glory of God, making the world beautiful, making it
Mm.
wonderful, not destroying it, but restoring everything. The restoration of all things, the book of Acts calls it. In Acts, I think
Mm.
it's chapter 3. Peter spoke about Christ must be in heaven until the restoration of all
It wasn't.
things.
Yeah.
So that's the worldview of the early church. It wasn't Malthusian. It was the glory of the coming of the kingdom of God. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now,
Mm.
this is the vision the church needs today, not to be hoodwinked by end times people that want to put us in fear and
Mm.
want to make enemies, telling us that it's the enemies that God wants to destroy our enemies before Jesus comes. No, He wants our enemies saved
Yeah.
before Jesus comes.
Yeah.
He wants us
Thank you.
to love our neighbor, to forgive
Mm.
our enemies, and
Mm.
to show Christ to them, to show the cross to our enemies by the way we carry our cross.
Amen. Amen.
Mm.
Thank you very much, sir. And
Thank
I want to reiterate your final words there. You know, Jesus said to us when he taught, when his disciples asked him to teach them to pray, he said, when you pray, say, that's what we usually call the Lord's Prayer today. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And like Prof said, this is God's agenda, that the will of God will be done on the earth as it is in heaven. The will of God, the counsel of God, the purpose of God for the earth is what will stand. Not the will of the globalists, not the agenda of an elite, of the elitists, but the will of God. And Prof told us just a while ago that we bring this will of God to bear and to pass on the earth by living divested lives, giving of ourselves like Jesus did, like we saw in the example of the early church, pouring out ourselves. That kind of community with an egalitarian structure where everybody's need was catered for. The Bible said that those in the early church in Acts of the Apostles, chapter 2, verse 45 and 44 and 45, and in chapter 4, verse 34 and 35, you see this system where those who had sold and brought to the apostles' field and they ministered according to every man's need. They gave, they distributed. I love the word distributed in the King James here. They distributed. So we saw the distribution of resources the distribution of materials to meet the needs of everyone, not the structure we have today where these things are redistributed just to attend to the excess and the whims of specific individuals. God calls us. And so, for every one of you who's been a part of this stream today, for those of you who will be watching on catch up or who are actually watching on catch up, whether months or years down from the actual date of us putting this together, it's important that we all have a part to play as we begin to live these divested lives, making room for other people in our lives and living not just for ourselves, but for our community and for others. We begin to contribute to making the will of God come to pass on the face of the earth as it is in heaven. The cross points us to community. The cross points us to sharing and caring. Thomas Malthus points us to fear, to division, to dividing and conquering, and to taking for ourselves. This is not the example of Jesus, and this is not the life God calls us to live as believers. We carry this testimony of Jesus, which is the testimony of the cross, to share, to care, to build community, to minister healing and encouragement to the world. And I want to believe that that's something you take from, our discussions with Prof today. And through the course of this week and beyond, go do something with these things you've heard. Prof, thank you very much for taking the time to share with us today again. It's always a blessing
Thank
to
you.
hear you talk and to learn from you. Thank you very much, sir.
I'm very grateful, sir. God bless you.
See you again soon on our
Thank you. Bye-bye.
podcast. Thank you, sir.
All right. Bye-bye, sir. Thank you.